Hey everyone, this is Mike, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about how you can get better at Final Fantasy XIV. Now, more specifically, I'm going to be talking about how you can get better at dealing damage, as that's really what most people care about when they think about getting better. Of course, mechanical consistency is a thing, but it's not really something that I can just teach you in a normal video. If you want to get better at doing mechanics and executing them correctly, then I would just advise you to go into Party Finder and actually do the fights themselves, because otherwise you're just not going to be able to learn that on something like a striking dummy, whereas some of the things that I'm going to be talking about today, you will be able to learn on a striking dummy, and then of course take that into practice when you do go into the fight. So today is going to be mostly focused on optimizing your DPS. It's going to be talking about some of the most fundamental things that I think every player should know. A lot of people do know this, but the problem is that a lot of people also tend to forget. And then, of course, as you familiarize yourself with your job, you can also take that into the fight, because something that I see with a lot of people is that either they are too focused on performing their job well and they're failing mechanics, or they're too focused on doing mechanics so that they forget how to play their job. So when you approach a new fight, the best thing you can do is to make sure that you know how to play your job well, have all the muscle memory, know how your job flows and that kind of stuff. And then when you do go into a fight, then you can put all of your attention towards learning the fight, and you don't have to care about your rotation as much, because it's already so baked into your muscle memory that it basically goes on itself. Now, in last video I talked about how you can kind of help with this little bit of rotational memory as well, with adjusting your HUD. Like, as you can see, I still have like this tiny thing over here that helps me keep track of things, because those are the things that I think are important for my Gunbreaker play, so that's why they are there. Again, if you want to know more about that, I'll leave a link in the description to that video. But yeah, so today we're going to talk about DPS. Now, I'm going to take Gunbreaker as an example, because one, it's my most played job at the moment in Shadowbringers, and two, it's a job that is really important about keeping all of its stuff on cooldown, to line up with the next burst windows, but also about delaying certain actions to fit them inside your burst window, which is also another thing that I'm going to be talking about a bit as well when it comes to optimizing your DPS. So first of all, doing your ABCs, aka always be casting or keeping your GCD rolling. Now, in Final Fantasy we have two kinds of abilities. We have GCDs, which are called weapon skills when we talk about physical damage dealers, and for casters these are called spells. And then which we also have abilities, and they're also called abilities on the physical damage dealers. Those are your off GCDs. A very easy way to discern them is when you press a GCD, you can see all of them go on cooldown. Now, the thing is that you basically never want to delay using a GCD, which is why we say keeping your GCD rolling. So basically, whenever you're fighting a boss, you want to make sure that all of your GCDs are rolling around, because that way you'll be doing the most damage possible, because it's better to hit an ability like a GCD late or something, or like, for example, special GCDs like Gnashing Fang. It's better to use that a GCD later or overcap on your gauge than just stand there staring at your hotbar for a few seconds and then, oh yeah, shit, I should actually do this, and then continue on with your rotation. So that's the first thing, keep your GCD rolling. Now, to do so, you also need to understand some other things when it comes to using your off GCDs. Now, in most cases, jobs can what we call double weaving. Now, weaving abilities is basically using an ability in between a GCD, like I do just here. Now, double weaving is when you use two GCDs, two off GCDs in between a GCD, like I did there. Now, as you could see, this still keeps my GCD going, so I'll do it again. So we press the GCD, we press two off GCDs, and my GCD keeps rolling as nothing else is happening. But as soon as we go into what are called triple weaves, this messes up your thing. So for example, I'm going to go and triple weave something right now. And then, as you can see, my GCD waits for like half a second before it goes on again. I have some other stuff on cooldown, so I'll do it again. I triple weaved again, and now my GCD, as you could see, had to wait a little bit before it could catch up again. Because using an off GCD takes its own little time, so in most cases you can only use two off GCDs per action. Now, there are a few exceptions to this, mainly in your melee DPS, because melee DPS, most of them have an attack speed buff. Dragoon is the only one that doesn't have the attack speed buff, so Dragoon can in most cases double weave, but when they're using their jumps, for example, Dragoon can't double weave either, because their jumps take up such a long animation that you can only use one jump per GCD. So that's the first like fundamental thing, I guess I could say, when it comes to learning jobs. And also, like, playing them well is keep your GCD rolling, and also only use two of GCDs maximum per GCD that you use. Of course, some jobs are a little bit different, like as I said with the attack speed buff. Astrologian, for example, can use one of GCD per GCD because of how their Malefic works. But there's also some other things that we can do. So I'm going to switch to my Scholar real quick, because Scholar is a caster. And I'm going to show you how you can do something called a slide cast. Now, normally when I'm playing Scholar and say I need to move, I'm going to put down some waymarks real quick, from A to B. Now, so let's start on A, and I'm going to try to move to B. So what I can do is a few things. I can broil, use Ruin 2 to move. And by the time I'm here, my GCD has finished, so I can just move freely, and then by the time I'm here, my GCD is always rolling when I do this, as you can see, because my Ruin 2 is an instant cast. Now, there are two other ways that you can do this, of course. You can use your broil, move over, not casting anything, and then cast again, which is the worst thing you can do. Then, as I said, you can broil, you can Ruin 2, because it's an instant, and then move over. Or you can do something what is called a slide cast. So when you have more time to move around, you can start slide casting abilities. As you can see, I'm basically moving very small steps, and I fucked it up there. But I'm taking very small steps. So this is only possible when you have the time to slide cast. Like, this is quite a big distance. So if, for example, a mechanic happens and I need to be on B as soon as possible, then I need to use the Ruin 2. But because Broil 3 does more damage than Ruin 2, if I have the time to be slide casting over there, then it's better for me to do so. Because this way you lose no damage and you still get to where you want to be. Now, the way this works is normally when you're casting and you move, you interrupt your cast, as you can see right there. But when you move late enough into your cast, the server will think that you're not moving yet, because there is a little bit of a delay between your computer and the servers. So what happens is, if you move late enough into your cast, as you can see, I moved quite a distance, but the cast still went off. Now I did it too early, so it cancelled, and now I did it on time again, so it worked. So that's basically how a slide cast works. You basically move really late into your cast so that the server thinks that you're moving after your cast is done, because of the small delay between you and the server, and this basically allows you to keep uptime whilst also moving around. And this of course works for all of the other casters as well, like Black Mage, Red Mage. Well, Red Mage doesn't really need it, but White Mage is another important one or something, because White Mage doesn't have the Ruin 2 that Scholar has, for example. So that's just a thing that can help you keep more uptime. Let's now talk about specifics on the jobs. So I'm of course not going to go into how you should optimize your complete rotation about every job and all of that kind of stuff, but I'm going to talk about some principles that you can do when learning a job. So first of all, of course, you need to learn what all of your abilities do. If you don't know what your abilities do, learn that first, but that's pretty basic. Now, after you've learned what all of your abilities do, you should learn what an opener is. Now, an opener is something that you use at the start of a fight, because it is where everybody else in your party will use all of their raid buffs. It is your biggest burst window into the fight as well. Well, normally in most cases at 6 minutes you're going to have another one, but that's beside the point. So in the opener it's important that you do as much burst damage as you can with your job, but on the other hand you're also setting yourself up for the rest of the fight. So if you do your opener correct and you use your stuff on cooldown for the most part, you're pretty much going to fix your job for the rest of the fight. So if you use the wrong opener, your rotation is going to look different than if you use the right one, or if you just use a different opener, of course, because some jobs have different openers that they can choose from. So this is why I'm going to take Gunbreaker, because Gunbreaker is such a perfect example of when you do a correct opener for how it flows towards the rest of the fight, because it has this really nice and beautiful 3-minute rotation. but also to show you that sometimes it's necessary to delay certain abilities so that they hit on their raid buffs. So for those that don't know how Gunbreaker works, you basically have No Mercy, which is a burst window of yours. This is a cell of damage buff that you apply, and during these 20 seconds you want to be able to use all of your strongest abilities. Most of them are on a 60-second cooldown. Gnashing Fang and a few other ones are on a 30-second one, but Gnashing Fang scales with skill speed, meaning that it's gonna come up sooner than your No Mercy. So we're always going to be delaying this by 1 GCD. So that's Gunbreaker TLDR, I guess you could say. So I'm just gonna do my opener, and then you'll see how everything is going to beautifully line up from basically start to finish. So here is where we start our burst window. I'm just gonna hit all of my abilities. So this is where we get everything on cooldown in a specific order. And then if we now basically keep everything on cooldown as it pops up again, everything should stay aligned. Now, of course, there are some things with drift, like for example, my blasting zone, this might drift maybe 1 or 2 GCDs or something like that. Usually it's going to be like 1 GCD, but you'll see that in just a second. So using our stuff on cooldown, Gnashing Fang again. Now, cool thing with Gunbreaker as well is because you can store 2 charges of your dash, you can basically keep them for either a gap closer, or you can keep it for when your burst window comes up again, which is in about 15 seconds. Now, as you can see as well, my Gnashing Fang is gonna come up a few seconds before my No Mercy, so that is why I am going to delay the Gnashing Fang by 1 GCD, so that I can use it underneath my damage buff. And then as you can see, we just passed the 1 minute mark, and everything is lining up perfectly. And then this basically keeps going down the road as well. I'll keep going for another 30 seconds so you've seen all of the abilities in action. But this is basically how it looks with Gunbreaker. Of course, with other jobs it's going to look slightly different because every job works differently. But for the most part this stays true for everyone. So as you can see, here we have another Gnashing Fang and my Bloodfist comes up. I spent all of my cartridges and it all lines up just beautifully. So that's basically why having the correct opener is really important to your play, as it sets you up for the rest of the fight. If I would have kept going basically after my 3 minutes, my rotation would have completely reset and I basically start again with what I did in the opener itself, and then that just repeats itself for the rest of the fight. Now, of course, missing uptime is something that will change this, which is a very normal thing. Most fights will lose you uptime in some way, because there is a mechanic like, for example, you need to run away from the boss or something, wait, and then run back. You can lose uptime that way. For example, what I just did, you can greed uptime by, for example, you use a GCD, you run back, and you run back in, and you barely lose any uptime. Sometimes the boss will just have you move away for way too long, and then you need to wait, and then by the time that you get back in, you've basically lost the GCD. But if you can move in between GCDs, you can kind of minimize the downtime that you have. So that's a really good thing that you can do as well. Of course, this doesn't work on all fights. On some fights it does work. For example, you can use gap closers this way as well. So say you need to run way farther away, you can just run really far and then use your gap closers to come back, something like that. So those are all kind of little tricks that you can do to help like keep more uptime. This is mainly for melee DPS players and casters, because ranged, well, lol uptime for ranged. And then of course casters, well, they can usually keep casting, but then again, movement is a lot more difficult for them. So those are things that you will need to learn inside of a fight. You need to know how long you have before you need to move away from the boss. Because let's say I have 2 seconds to move away from the boss. I could hit it, run, wait a second, and then go back in. Or I could have like taken that extra GCD, so I have 1 and then 2 and then I run away. Now the ability goes off and I can run straight back in or something like that. So learning the timings on the boss fights themselves is going to be really important when it comes to keeping up time. Of course, this is mainly for melee players. Ranged, it's more towards like where you can use your instant cast abilities for movement. Like for example, with Black Mage, it's important to know when you can use your triple casts, when you can use your ley lines, so whether you have time to like stay down in the fight or something like that, to like stay in place. So, but those are things that are more fight specific. Now, one last tip that I'm going to give you before we end the video is a place where you can learn your opener beautifully. So The annoying thing when you're learning an opener, and for example, I think some jobs have it worse than Gunbreaker, because Gunbreaker is pretty much like a 90-second cooldown. But still, if you've done this 20-second rotation, you don't always immediately want to wait for like a minute before you can do it again. So we're going to go to Yulmore, and what we have in Yulmore is something called the Stone Sky Sea. This is not an exact science, by the way, because Stone Sky Sea is kind of like a way on how you can gauge your or gauge your DPS when it comes to being able to beat a boss fight. Because in a boss fight you're gonna have increased stats, because each time you have a different role in your party, you are going to be having that 1% DPS buff, and then of course raid windows, raid buffs and all of that kind of stuff. So Stone Sky Sea, you basically select a duty. So say for example I am practicing E4 Savage and I want to know if I have the DPS for it. So you go in here and then you get a striking dummy that has a certain amount of HP. And then basically if you can beat this striking dummy in 3 minutes, you know that you do enough DPS to beat the fight. But another cool thing about these things is, and I'm just gonna blow all of my things basically, is that when you use all of your abilities, they actually all reset. So I'm now just, well, using whatever because I can. I'm gonna use all of my long cooldowns as well. Okay, so now I've basically fucked up my opener, so to speak. I run away. I talk to this guy right here, we go out, and then when I go back into the Stone Sky Sea, you'll see that all of my abilities are going to be reset. So I go back in, oh wait, I'm waiting for that other thing to fail, because there's like 15 seconds or something that it takes for you to fail if you stop doing stuff. But as you can see, now that I've loaded back in, all of my abilities have been reset. So this place is amazing for when you want to practice your opener, because you can just go in, you do your opener, either you failed it or you did it correct, you go out, you go in again, you practice your opener again. Practicing rotations is not that great on this, because this is only a 3-minute striking dummy. So after these 3 minutes are over, you're either going to be failed and the dummy explodes, or you kill the dummy in time and it explodes as well. So for example with Gunbreaker, who has a 3-minute rotation, this is already not good enough, because either by the time that you get to that 3-minute point, well, technically it's a bit longer, because you take like 5 or like 6 seconds before you start your rotation really with your opener. So this 3-minute thing is not good for when you want to practice your rotation in the long run, but it's really good when you're trying to get used to a job and get used to the opener. And then once, of course, you have gotten used to your opener, you can, for example, go to, again in Colusia, you can just go find a striking dummy out in the world. I have one next to my house, but there's also going to be some striking dummies that are just littered around the place, like as you can see. I think it's down here somewhere. Yeah, back here, for example, there's some striking dummies. So you can just use these, try and practice your rotation on there in the long run. Usually what I like to do, 9 minutes or something, or 10 minutes if you're trying to parse yourself as well, seems to be a good timer, because that way you've rotated through all of your cooldowns at least once or twice, so that you can do that. Now, one final thing that I'm going to say as well is install a program called ACT, or Advanced Combat Tracker. Now, this is a third-party program that technically is not legal, but they allow you to use it as long as you don't harass other players with it. This is something that you can use to actually track a lot of things, and not just your own personal DPS. It can track how much damage you're taking, it can track how much healing you or your other healer is doing, how much you're overhealing, so that you know when you're healing too much or something like that. Because when it comes to playing healer, optimizing your heals is really important to optimize your damage, because it's basically you with your co-healer working together to optimize your off-global cooldown healing as much as possible. So like for example, if I go to Scholar again, I want to be pressing Broil as much as possible and not Sucker or Adlo. So whenever I can make it so that my Fairy or an off-global cooldown is taking care of the healing, instead of me using Physic, Sucker or Adloquium, that means that I'm going to be doing more damage because I'm pressing more Broils, basically. So for healers, that is an important thing. So when you see that you're healing 50% too much, you know that, for example, say you're doing Sucker Indom, which are 2 AoE heals to heal the party up, but then you see on your parser or your ACT that you're healing for way too much, then maybe it's better to just try only using the indom or something like that. So yeah, those are kind of things that can help you out. ACT is also great because you can upload your parse to a website called FFXIV. On this website, you can basically go way deeper into your parse to check out your rotation, check out your uptime, check your costs per minute, see how much damage you took from a certain tank buster or something like that, so you know that maybe you need an extra cooldown to survive that kind of stuff. There is a lot of things that you can check in there, way too much for me to go in depth about all of those things right now. But it is a really good way to help you improve, because you can also look at what other people are doing and then maybe apply that, what those people are doing to your own gameplay and improve that way as well. So with all of that being said, that's pretty much everything I got for now. Those are kind of like my fundamental tips and tricks on how to improve in this game. Of course, if you want to get better, you're going to have to practice a lot. Go into the fights, do the fights themselves over and over again until you're used to the mechanics that the fights are throwing out. And then when you know how you can optimize your DPS around those mechanics, that's when you will become a much better player. So with all of that being said, I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.